Hello everyone, I'm Heath, and in this video we're going to be breaking down the numbers in a table like we've done before regarding our idea of the inverted proficiency dice for 5e Dungeons & Dragons or potentially other role-playing games if we were developing something from scratch. We want to look at the influence of this inverted proficiency dice idea that we went through in the previous video. So if you haven't seen that, you may want to watch that before you watch this one. But I do want to point out that this video series should definitely be regarded as a dialogue. I've been incredibly impressed with the quality of the conversation that's been going on in the comments section. And so if you've been watching through all of these videos in order, I also recommend that you read many of the comments that are down below the videos, because there have been many people who have had fantastic insights into what we're talking about here, and that should definitely be considered as we're moving on to other videos. I certainly do. I've been reading all of the comments that have been provided. I've been responding to many of those in comments, and sometimes I wish I'd be able to bring them into the videos, but actually I found out that if I respond to them, then it isn't quite as easy for me to find them anymore because YouTube marks them as comments I've already responded to. But I do want to bring this up right here before we go on to our numerical breakdown. This was by Pavfira, and I think this is a very important comment. So let's look at this. Something was bothering me about this analysis method when I commented on the D10 video, and I couldn't put my finger on it until now. It comes from how you calculate the second value, or perhaps how it's labeled. So I think it may end up being a labeling issue, but let's look. In your system, you assign some dice outcomes as success without modification and failure without modification. You add those up and call that the probability where the success or failure of the task is determined by the roll of the dice. Yes, true. That makes sense to me. So far, so good. Then you add up success with modification and call that the probability where the success or failure of the task is determined by the skill of the character. My issue is that you're not accounting for the failure with modification anywhere. Failure with modification would show up if you had a negative modifier on your dice roll. Yes, exactly. That's absolutely true. And I had this discussion with another person saying what would happen if your modifier that was, the part of your character, either because of your proficiency or more likely your attribute modifier, was negative. Well, then you would have failure because of the skill of the character. It's just negative. It's going forward. So at the moment, yes, I did have this category that was the success or failure of the task being determined by the character, but in most all of the examples that we've looked at, the modification of the character's skill has been positive. It's possible you would have a negative modifier, and therefore the character would contribute to failure, but that isn't most likely in most cases that we've been looking at here. In 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, which we've been using kind of as our example that we've been looking at, it isn't possible for the intrinsic characteristics of the character to be both positive and negative. When you add up your proficiency bonus and your attribute bonus, either you're going to be positive or you're going to be negative. So that's why I was saying success or failure, although yes, in most cases, we're definitely going towards success. However, Pav says, I argue that failure without modification values ought to count as failure with modifications as well. To explain why, imagine the DM throwing a Tarosk at the players for some reason, which is AC 25. And for some reason on the wizard's turn, rather than do wizardly things, they declare they want to charge forward and swing with their magical quarterstaff, attacking with a +1 bonus. Applying the analysis from these videos, make a table for D20 plus 1 versus 25. A roll of 1 to 19 is failure without modification, yes, and a 20 is success without modification by virtue of a critical hit. So yes, that's interesting that if a roll of a 20 is always going to hit, regardless of the other, modifications, then a roll of a 20 would be success without modification just because we have had a critical hit. Therefore, the percent chance of the success of failure of the task is determined by the roll of the die is 100%, which makes sense because we're praying for a natural 20. Yes, I agree. And the measly +1 bonus is doing nothing to help. I agree. But then this current system argues that the percentage chance of the success or failure of the task is determined by the skill of the character is 0%. Yes, that is what I'm arguing. Is that really the case? When the wizard could have had a higher strength, a better weapon, magical items, or more relevant feats or class features, used different skills that they are more proficient with, such as magic, or simply not chosen to undertake a task so difficult with a modifier so low, is the skill of the character really 0% responsible for the outcome? I would argue that the low skill of the character is the crux of the issue. I think all of this is important stuff to think about. I do disagree with the end here because I'm not trying to evaluate the player's choice. That this kind of analysis occurs after the player has already made the choice to go and try to hit the Tarosk with a stick rather than casting a spell which they are more proficient with. So I agree that we would need more complex analysis if the player's skill could both simultaneously increase the chance of success and the chance of failure, but really most of this analysis is only being conducted after the player has already chosen a course of action. If I've misunderstood, please let me know in the comments. Please let me know in the comments, because I think this is important to think about. Okay, so now let's go forward here and take a look at our inverted proficiency dice success or failure ratio based on what we were looking at in the previous video when we were saying we're going to double the proficiency modifier, but then we're also going to add the inverted proficiency dice to the character's test when they are trying to accomplish some kind of task. If you haven't seen that video, you should probably go and watch the previous video before going on to this one. So let's take a look at this. So here we are rolling 1d12 and adding 1d4, and we're adding +4. This is our lowest level of proficiency. And in all of these cases, we're going to say we're going up against DC 15, which is a medium task. Some people want to say I should be doing more of these DCs. Some people say I'm doing too many. But if you think I'm doing too few of them, yes, I could definitely be more systematic about going through all the DCs. And if I were trying to compile a compendium or something where you could look through all of the different results, I think we should definitely go through all of them. But I'm just doing this for YouTube videos, and so I'm basically trying to just choose some things that are, I think, at least reasonable examples which illustrate the point. So I'm going to go with DC 15 on all of these. This is the 1 through 4 level character, so you'd be rolling a 1d12 plus a d4. You're getting a +4 because of your doubled proficiency modifier. You're trying to hit a DC 15, and what does that mean? That means that 68.73% of the time the success or failure of the task is determined by the roll of the dice. And then 31.24 of the time, the success has been determined by the skill of the character. But our total chance of success is higher, 37.49% of the time, because if you are somebody who says, I want the attempt at making the roll on the dice, using this system you would have it. That means that something like a little bit over 6% of the time, you would be able to roll a 15 or a 16 and accomplish the task regardless of your modifier. And by the way, the center column in here is calculated by any dice, and that is the dice roll plus the modifier. When you're looking over here on my table, as has been the case in all of the previous videos, you are looking at a number and the percentage chance of rolling that number, and then I'm folding in the static modifier later. If you want to include the static modifier with the die, I'm putting that on this table right here in the center in all of these. And as you can see, this isn't a bell curve because, you know, from a technical statistical sense, a bell curve has a certain meaning, and I get that. Some people have brought that up in saying that a 2d10 system isn't technically a bell curve system. There's a pyramid or a stepped form to it, but from our perspective, I think from this analysis, it's kind of the same thing, that we're reducing the probability of the low end and the high end and biasing ourselves toward a middle. That's basically what I'm talking about here. Although I admit, yes, if we're talking about technical statistical definitions, we may have come up with some different words to use. But generally, that's what we're talking about. So as we can see that we're getting that when we're rolling the D12 and the D4. And that's why even though I'm typically trying to reduce randomness, I don't mind rolling the D12 plus the D4. I would prefer to do that rather than roll the D12 plus D4, because when you start to add additional dice into the mix, you start to get this distribution here, which is biased toward the middle, right? So that's what's going on here. So, low-level character, 68% of the time determined by the roll of the dice, 31% of the time determined by skill, but we did originally say that was what we were kind of looking for if we were going to go with this system, because we wanted randomness to be more important in the game, or a more important part of the game, when the characters were lower level. So we should reduce randomness as we go if we're getting this right with this particular system. So moving on to the next level, which would be level 5 to whatever, I suppose. In this case, we would be using a D10, still rolling a D4, but this time we would be getting a +6. So if we do that, what happens? Well, in this case, 55% of the time, success or failure is determined by the roll of the dice. And then 45% of the time, the success or failure of the task is determined by the skill of the character. And we have a total chance of success of 45%. So that is definitely, that's moving toward a 50-50 roll. So we were less than 50-50. We were more chance in the previous tier of play. We've gone up another tier of play, and now we're kind of at the 50-50 level. Okay, this may still not be exactly what I would want, but I still think it's better. And we've certainly gone from low levels, high randomness. We've reduced randomness here at the next level of play. Let's go to the third level of play, when we would be rolling a D8 plus a D4, but we would be getting a +8 modifier. So here is our distribution on here, and we would say that 43% of the time, success or failure is determined by dice, and 56% of the time, failure is determined by the skill of the dice. So we're starting to kind of move in this tier of play toward the character. We've got a total chance of success of 56.36% of the time. Now here, I would say we're spending a lot of time in these two different tiers of play, which are close to 50-50. But nonetheless, the progression is still there. So that would be my concern, that we're spending a lot of time in this game. This would be like 6 or 8 levels of play or something like that, where we're basically looking at 50-50, biased a little one way or biased a little bit of another, but we're at least making the progression in the direction that we'd want to go. We move up to the next tier of play, where we would be rolling D6 plus D4. We would be getting a +10 to our dice, and this means that 25% of the time, success or failure is determined by the dice, and then 75% of the time, the task is determined by the skill of the character. We've all of a sudden gone massively in favor of the player. That may be too abrupt a transition. It's working, I think, as far as what we're trying to do. If you say we should be more random at lower levels, and then as you increase in level, we should become less random, then this is working. But we do have kind of an abrupt jump here, going from basically 50-50 one way, basically 50-50 slightly another way, and then all of a sudden 25-75 that it slides here. And in this case, total chance of success 75 again. And then we go up to our highest level of play, where we are rolling D4 plus D4 plus D12, and then 6.25% of the time, success or failure is determined by the roll of the dice. 93.75% of the time, we are determined by the skill of the character, and that makes sense because at this point we would be at levels 17 to 20, so we would think that our skill is a highly determining factor in trying to complete a DC 15 medium task. Remember, all of this was against a medium level task, for a total chance of success of 93.75%. So what do you think? I think in general that kind of does what we want it to do. There are some large jumps there. There might be a way to smooth it out in the middle, but assuming that you're okay with things being much more random as you are low level and then decreasing randomness as you get to higher levels, well, this system would be doing that. It would definitely be doing that. It also compresses our numbers, so we're not dealing with numbers like 45 or 35 or 55 or something like that. So what do you think? Let me know down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and all of that jazz. It really helps a lot. But also, please check out The Cultists, the web series on this channel about modern-day D&D playing Lovecraftian cultists who just want to worship Cthulhu in a world full of people who just don't understand. Season 1 is on the channel now. But also, please check out my YouTube channel. I have over 150 videos on tabletop games and the fantasy genre. If you've enjoyed this video, you might enjoy many of them as well. I look forward to seeing you for them and many more videos to come. Later.